Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's really a treat to be back at First Christian, now Urban Sanctuary. It's been a lot of years since first coming here, and it's lovely to see so many faces, old and new. So thank you so much. When Dana called me and asked if I would give some sort of message, I thought she dialed the wrong number. And I've never, ever had any talent in the ecclesiastical oratory department, so I thought, to be safe, I'll start with a reading. This is from Acts 29. And it came to pass, when Paul was at Corinth, and certain disciples came upon a mob that was stoning an organist. And Paul said unto them, What then hath he done unto thee, that his head should be bruised? And the people cried with one voice, He hath played too loud. Yea, in the singing of psalms he maketh our heads to ring, as if they were beaten with hammers. Behold, he sitteth up high in the loft, and mighty are the pipes, and mighty is the noise thereof. And though there be few of us below, he nevertheless playeth with all the stops. The Assyrian trumpet stop, and the stop of the ram's horn, and the stop that soundeth like the sawing of stone. And we cannot hear the words that cometh out of our own mouths. He always talketh us in the variations that confuse us mightily, and playeth loud and discordant, always in a militant tempo, so that we do not have time to breathe as we sing. Lo, he is a plague upon the faith, and should be chastised. Well, Paul, upon hearing this, had himself picked up a small stone and was about to cast it, but then he set it down and bade that the organist come forward. He was a narrow man, pale of complexion, rather dry, flaking, thin of hair. And Paul said to him, Why hast thou so abused thy brethren? And the organist replied, I could not hear them singing from where I sat, and therefore I played the louder, so as to encourage them. And Paul turned round to the mob, and he said, Let him who has never played an organ cast the first stone. And they cast stones for a while until their arms were tired. And Paul bade the organist repent, and he did. And Paul said unto him, Thou shalt take up the flute and play it 30 days to cleanse thy spirit. And afterward they returned to Corinth and sang psalms unaccompanied, and then had coffee and were refreshed in the faith. So, thank you to Garrison Keeler for that. Sorry, Paul. So, a little today about the pipe organ. I will try to keep this moving. As usual, I put too much in and we'll try to keep it under time here. So a little bit about what a pipe organ is, how it works, where it came from, its contributions and role in Western liturgical music. I sort of limited it to Western, not so much other places, and then a little bit about some of the local instruments in our Bay Area. So as I was putting this together, a number of themes sort of stood out to me, mostly around structure. Organs have not only structure of their own physical presence and the case and the pipe work and the facade and the console and all of that, but the instrument lives inside a building, and the space inside the building is really 50% or more of the sound of the instrument. You could take a wonderful organ and put it in a really dry acoustic with lots of carpet and curtains, and it would sound vastly different than in a big resonant cathedral full of marble. So building is also important. It has a presence. Often pipe organs, especially when they were in their height of their technology and building, were awesome structures, particularly for people in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. Nothing like this existed. They were the most complex machines on the planet and remain so until the development of the telephone exchange. There's a symmetry about them, and of course, a great deal of history. There's also the sound, the technology that goes into building the organs that has evolved over time, and then also resonance. And I mean resonance in the sense of not just the physical resonance of sound waves, vibration of air that produces sound, but also with a large instrument with a sizey, beefy pedal division, you can feel the building shake. And if you've ever felt that with a really loud instrument, it's quite moving. And then, of course, the resonance that music can have with the soul and its place in faith and to an ineffable quality to move to tears. So, without further ado, what is a pipe organ? Well, I thought I'd start with a simple diagram which shows, a few smokestacks, a gas pedal, a brake on the left. There's a little room in the side of the console where the organist hides out during the sermon, the best parts of the service, and anyway. So, the pipe organ, originally from the Greek and Latin, it's essentially a wind instrument that is controlled by a keyboard. There were wind instruments and little pipe instruments and mouth organs that existed before the pipe organ, but they did not have a mechanism of keys to activate the individual pipes. The organ produces its sound by vibrating an air column through a pipe. The air has to be under some kind of controlled pressure, a constant pressure. As I said, the air that is moving into the pipes is controlled by a series of keyboards from a console. So one of the first things we ever see on a pipe organ is the facade, the front of the organ. And unfortunately, this organ, the facade is really the wood that you see. You have to kind of go up to see any pipes. But many organs have pipes in the very front, and a lot of times those are non-functional. So here's an example of a Baroque organ, highly ornate, beautiful to look at, very pretty. In this case, these pipes are functional, but many organs they're not. They're just simply for display. And the ugly truth behind that facade is sometimes something quite different. If you've been inside the case of an organ, you will see rows and rows and rows and rows of pipes organized in ways that would befuddle most of us, including me. It's quite interesting. You will see each row of these pipes is called a rank, and that is basically one instrument. So it might be like a flute, or a string, or a trumpet, or a clarinet, or a bassoon, or you name it, a sackbut. Many of the names that you'll see on the stops of an organ harken back to instruments from the medieval period and on, some of which don't really exist or aren't used anymore. Okay, this is the the pipe organ from the former Crystal Cathedral, which is now Christ Church, I believe. In 2000 and something, I think 2010, somewhere around there, they took apart, this is the Hazelwright organ. It's one of the largest organs in the world. It's about third largest. It has something like, 18,000 pipes. It's quite enormous. And it was moved to Italy and restored and then brought back. And the inaugural recitals had a whole series of recitals set up, and they had to cancel those because of COVID. So I'm hoping that we'll get to hear that instrument one day soon. So how does it work a little bit? I'm going to sort of blitz through some of this. All organs have some kind of device that produces wind. So they have bellows, or nowadays a blower. That's usually an electrical device. But in the olden days, they used to have bellows that people had to lift or stamp with their feet. It required a poor person or multiple people to produce that air while the organist was sitting over there playing. Division of labor. This is a typical sort of cylindrical blower, and we have one that powers this organ downstairs in the basement where the goblins live. This is from 1766. This is a diagram of sort of a organ of basic technology at the time. You have the bellows, as you can see. You have the organist, or rather the person on the left is lifting these levers, and heavy weights were placed on the tops of the bellows that would lower them slowly at a constant speed to provide constant pressure. Otherwise, the pitch of the organ would be or the strength of the sound would be going all over the place. And then you see there's a whole series of mechanisms and action and levers and pulleys and wires and things that connect the keys to the upper pipes above, which produce the sound. So the control center of the organ is the console. They're often quite large. This is a larger instrument, 5 individual keyboards or manuals. And you see banks and banks of what we call stops on the right. Stops, from the expression, pull out all the stops. Basically, when stops are in, they are stopping all the sound. If you pull them out, you are unstopping the sound. And now the air can go through. It's literally a board with a hole in it, like this. And when you pull the stop out, it opens up and allows the air to move through the pipe and produce sound. Once the key has also been activated. So, anyway, enough about that. So these are some close-ups of what stops look like. The one in the middle is a more sort of contemporary stop tax, a little bit easier to move. This is kind of an interesting variation on different stops. There's the internet stop, the clergy ejector, the chocolate, coffee, beer, and meet the pastor stop. So, okay, sorry, Dana. So in the organ you have sometimes many hundreds of different instruments, and there has to be some way to organize them. So they are organized into divisions, and a division is a collection of different instruments all together that are operated or controlled by a single keyboard. So in the case of our organ, we have we actually have 3 divisions. We have one that is called the grate, which is on this side, and that is the, sorry, I apologize, it's on this side. And that is sort of the beef of the organ. It's the main principal major stops that are instruments that are used to provide congregational singing. And then the other side is what's called the swell. And I'll talk a little bit more about the swell. That is the upper keyboard. And then, of course, you have the pedals played with the feet. And that's another division which are actually hidden inside the grate case on this side as well. So we have on the organ the couplers. I think I'll skip that. And then we also have an expression pedal. You can see these louvers here that are opening and closing. This is what a swell box does. So all of the pipes inside the swell on this side are actually inside a wooden box with louvers in the front. And then there's what I call the gas pedal earlier down here that I can push forward and pull back. That opens and closes the louvers, which allows me to give expression or change the loudness and softness of the sound. So it is possible to make something loud and then gradually get softer. Whereas all of the other keyboards that don't have expression pedals with louvers, no matter how hard you hit the key, you get the same sound. It's not like a piano where you can play hard and get a loud sound, or play gently and get a soft sound. You can't do that in an organ. So it's more difficult to be expressive because of that on an organ. I'll skip this. Organ pipes are made of flues, which are just basically open cylinders or sometimes boxes of wood. At the bottom of the pipe there is a blade, and air is forced through the pipe, a little blade. A sheet of air passes over the blade, and because of the Bernoulli principle, the air goes in and then out, in and then out, in and then out, and that repeats very quickly. It causes vibrations, which of course produce frequency of sound that varies based on the length of the pipe. So the longer the pipe, the lower the sound. The shorter the pipe, the higher it will be. Other pipes are reed pipes, which they have an actual reed, like a clarinet or an oboe or a bassoon or something, and it vibrates against the resonator and produces sort of like a brass sound, a buzzing sound. You can see there's many different varieties of types of pipes on the pipe organ. I'll skip that. Just to give you some idea of the range of size of pipe organ pipes. They range from 64 feet in length, and this is a picture of the Atlantic City Convention Center organ. There are only 2 organs in the world that actually have a range of 64-foot pipes, 64 foot being the lowest pipe, the low C on the pedal board, and they are extremely heavy, extremely expensive, and require some scaffolding and structure so that they don't collapse under their own weight. but they are impressive. It's a stop really that you don't hear so much as feel. I have played organs with 64-foot pipe organ range, but they're not true, real, actual pipes. They are generated by other means, electrical or faux things I won't get into. So, okay, origins of the organ. The first organ really was back in the 3rd century, and before Common Era, or BC as we used to say. It was a hydraulis. It was an instrument that, this is an actual mosaic on the right here, where you can see a chamber that would be filled with water, and then they pumped air into the chamber, and then the water would push weight and push down on the air and provide a constant stream of wind, and then the operator up the top would individually use some sort of a key mechanism to play notes. This was the first known organ that we have. There are no examples of them left anymore. They're fragments that they found. In the 2nd century, bellows were invented. The 5th century, all of the development up to that time, the 700 years of the organ, was lost with the fall of Rome, and the organ, there's really no mention of it that we can find. Until about the 8th century, in the court of Charlemagne from Byzantium, an organ was brought to the court and sort of took off at that point. So from the 8th century onward is really sort of the evolution of the pipe organ in the Western world. There's not a lot of great information and details about pipe organs during the medieval period, but there are mosaics, there are wood carvings, there are parchments and things that have survived that do give us some interesting history there. In the sake of time, I'll press on. Basically, in short, pipe organs evolved significantly throughout, up until the time of the Renaissance. And it really was about the 18th century, the mid-1700s or so, that the technology of the organ had developed and hasn't appreciably, the core qualities, the core qualities of the pipe organ have not changed really very much since the 18th century. We of course now have the evolution of electronic instruments and all kinds of technology to make playing the instrument and expand its capabilities, but the core technology hasn't really developed too much since then. So Baroque organs, I will skip this, just really were kind of the pinnacle of organ development in Germany. They led the development of instruments for 300 years. Most of the major countries have their own style of organ building. The English, the Italians, the French, the Germans, and so on and so forth. So here we now move to the 20th century. This was built in the early 1900s. It is the world's largest pipe organ, fully functioning pipe organ. It's in the 7-story court at the Macy's store in Philadelphia. It's called the Wanamaker organ. It's very famous. It has over 28,000 pipes. It's huge. You can see the console is quite overwhelming. So I hope I would never be asked, but I certainly hope I'm never asked to play it. I wouldn't know where to start. And then we have today's modern instruments. Many of them use digital technology. They record real pipe organ sounds and then reproduce them digitally, which what you're hearing is an actual very high quality recording of a real pipe that is then replayed back through and there's some other machinations that go on at the beginning, the activation of the sound, and the end of the sound too, and there's some cycling so it doesn't sound artificial, but they're quite remarkable. This organ was built in 2013 and belongs to Cameron Carpenter, very famous young, rather flamboyant organist, who is a true prodigy in the organ world. He designed this organ and had it built for him. I've seen it or heard it played in San Francisco at the Jazz Center, and it's something to behold. And let's see, as far as the role of the organ in Western liturgical music, we really don't know much about how the organ came to be associated with churches. There's not a lot of information about that, and it's a bit mysterious. The church really in early times, meaning the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th centuries, took a pretty dim view of the organ because It was associated with luxury, kings and the wealthy and so forth. It was used for mostly secular events and so forth. But gradually over time, as the instrument evolved a bit, it started to be used for accompanying singing and then choirs in churches. It was used for both political and ecclesiastical purposes. There are theories that it was really used to sort of impress the faithful, the crowd, the congregation with its power and the awe of its sound, and perhaps also to reflect some of the glory of the power of the Lord or whoever had created the church or built the church or purchased it for the congregation. But certainly without the church's role in encouraging the pipe organ, it's quite likely that the pipe organ would never have developed to the extent that it did. And there came a time when I think that if any of you have ever visited, say, in Paris, Notre Dame, or any of the great cathedrals built in the medieval period or even slightly later than that, if one could transport oneself back to that time and imagine what it was to step into a building like that and look up and to see an organ and hear that sound, it must have been a thing of just such majesty and wonder. So a feeling I still get when I go see those instruments. So I threw together a little bit about some local instruments. As we wrap up here, this is the Davies Symphony Hall organ, built in 1984. Wonderful instrument, still played a fair bit. You can go hear it. This is Grace Cathedral. You'll notice with this church it has divisions of pipes in different locations in the church, in the back, in the front, and on the side. And it gives a sort of call and response and echo quality to the playing of the instrument. And these are some of the other divisions in the church. And then here's the Cathedral of Christ the Light in Oakland, which put in a new French organ in 2010. I was able to go up and hear that. It's really stunning. Very modern design. This is an example of an open design where there's no case. So you see on the left here and the right, the pipes are just out in the open. There's no case. It's kind of the more modern style of building more modern instruments. This is the console. Quite an impressive structure. And here's St. Joseph Cathedral, just up the street. An 1886 instrument in absolutely magnificent condition, almost as good as the day it was built. Restoration was done in the late 80s. 27 ranks. It's a tracker, entirely mechanical. There's nothing electronic about it, just the blowers. So go see it if you haven't been inside St. Joseph's, worth a peek. And here's my homage to the first Christian choir back in the day, in the 90s. So thank you so much.